My name is Clara, and I'm 21 years old. Last year, something happened that completely destroyed my family's world and left a Fortune 500 CEO speechless. For as long as I can remember, I've been the ghost in my own house. While my brother Marcus gets praised for breathing, I get handed a dish towel and told to make myself useful. This morning started like every other. I woke up at 6 a.m. to make breakfast for everyone. They ate first. They always eat first. I get whatever's left, usually cold scraps, while loading the dishwasher. But here's what they don't know. The girl they treat like hired help? The daughter they pretend doesn't exist unless they need something cleaned? I was building something that would make their world crumble in ways they couldn't imagine. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, you need to hear this story. Because what happened next turned my parents' perfect family fantasy into their worst nightmare. Before I share how I turned the tables on my family, hit that like and subscribe, but only if you love seeing justice served where it's least expected. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I read every single one. Let me take you back 5 years to understand how deep this goes. Picture my 16th birthday. Most kids dream about getting car keys or at least a decent party with friends. I woke up that morning with butterflies in my stomach. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as more than just the family servant. The whole family gathered in the living room after dinner. Even Aunt Darlene drove over specially for the occasion. I remember thinking this felt important, like something big was about to happen. Mom stood there with this wrapped box, and for one stupid moment, I thought maybe she actually cared. Maybe she'd gotten me something thoughtful, something that showed she noticed I existed. Marcus had gotten his BMW the month before for his 18th birthday. Dad called it an investment in his future. They threw him a party with 50 people. The garage still smelled like new leather. But me? I unwrapped that box with trembling fingers, and inside was a mop. Not even a nice mop. A cheap yellow one with strings already falling off. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before Mom started laughing. "It's symbolic," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Since you're always cleaning anyway." Dad chuckled. Marcus nearly fell off the couch laughing. Aunt Darlene clapped her hands like it was the funniest joke she'd ever heard. I stood there holding that mop handle, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. But I smiled. God help me, I actually smiled and said, "Thanks, Mom. It's perfect." That night, I cried into my pillow until I couldn't breathe. But something else happened in that room. Something shifted inside me that I didn't recognize yet. I looked at that mop leaning against my bedroom wall, and I made a promise. One day, they wouldn't be laughing. One day, they'd realize exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. I kept that mop. Still have it, actually. It sits in my apartment now as a reminder of the moment I decided to stop accepting their version of who I was supposed to be. Have you ever had a moment where someone's cruelty accidentally showed you your own strength? Because that birthday gift became the best thing they ever gave me, even though they meant it as a joke. Comment below if you've ever turned someone's mockery into motivation. Because that mop? It started a revolution they never saw coming. Every single night at 6:30 p.m., our family performs the same ritual. And every single night, I'm reminded exactly where I stand in the pecking order. The dining room table seats 8, but only 4 people eat. Dad sits at the head like some kind of king. Mom takes her spot to his right. Marcus claims the chair across from her. Me? I don't get a chair. I stand behind them like a waitress in my own home. "Clara, Gerald's water is getting low," Mom would say without even looking at me. "And Marcus needs more potatoes." I'd refill glasses, reload plates, and hover in the background while they discussed their important lives. Dad's business deals. Marcus's college applications. Mom's charity committee drama. If I dared to grab a plate and sit down before everyone was completely finished, Mom's voice would crack like a whip. "Clara, act like a lady, not a guest. Clear the table first." A guest. In my own house. The worst part? They'd have these deep conversations right in front of me like I was furniture. Dad would ask Marcus about his future plans. Mom would gush about his accomplishments. They'd debate which internship would look best on his resume. Meanwhile, I'm standing there holding a pitcher of ice water, invisible. One night last month, Dad was bragging to Mom about how proud he was of Marcus. "He's got real leadership potential," he said. "Natural business instincts. He's going to make something of himself." I almost laughed out loud. Marcus couldn't even figure out how to do his own laundry. But here's what really got to me. After they'd finally finished eating and I was loading the dishwasher, I heard Mom on the phone with her sister. "Gerald and I are so blessed," she was saying. "Marcus is just exceptional. So driven and ambitious. We really hit the jackpot with him." I stood there with soap suds up to my elbows, listening to my own mother gush about her one successful child. Like I didn't exist. Like I hadn't gotten straight A's my entire life while working twice as hard as Marcus ever had. That night, I made myself a sandwich after everyone went to bed. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter in the dark, and I realized something important. They weren't just ignoring my potential. They were actively erasing it. Every night, they reinforced this idea that Marcus was the future and I was just support staff. But what they didn't know was that I'd been watching everything. Learning everything. I saw how Dad handled his business calls. I noticed which strategies worked for Mom's committees. I absorbed Marcus's college prep materials when I was supposed to be cleaning his room. They thought they were teaching me to be invisible. Instead, they were giving me a front row seat to study exactly how they operated. Have you ever been treated like background noise in your own family? 3 years ago, I got the phone call that should have changed everything. Instead, it nearly broke me. "Congratulations, Clara," the voice on the other end said. "You've been selected for our full academic scholarship. For years, everything covered. We're impressed by your grades and your essay about overcoming family challenges." I was standing in the laundry room, folding Marcus's designer shirts, when my entire world shifted. A full ride to State University. Business program. Everything I'd dreamed about since I was 12 years old. I ran upstairs to tell my parents, practically floating with excitement. They were in the living room with coffee, discussing Marcus's upcoming graduation party. "Mom, Dad, you're not going to believe this," I burst in, waving the acceptance letter. "I got a full scholarship. For years, completely free." The silence that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Dad looked up from his newspaper with this expression I'll never forget. Not pride. Not excitement. Confusion. Like I'd just told him I was planning to fly to Mars. "A scholarship," he repeated slowly. "For what?" "Business school, Dad. State University wants me in their honors program. They said my application was exceptional." Mom set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Clara, honey, don't you think you should focus on more practical things? Marcus is going to need support when he starts his career. Family businesses require family commitment." Family business. We didn't even have a family business. "But this is my chance," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. I could actually make something of myself. That's when Dad delivered the blow that still keeps me up at night. "Sweetheart, college isn't for everyone. You're good at taking care of things here. Why rock the boat?" Marcus walked in just as the conversation died. He glanced at the letter in my hands and smirked. "Community college application? Good for you, Clara. Everyone needs realistic goals." I wanted to scream that it was a full academic scholarship to a 4-year university. That their precious golden boy had never even been offered one. That I'd earned something he couldn't buy his way into. Instead, I folded the letter and went back to the laundry room. But here's the part that really destroyed me. 2 weeks later, I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Darlene at the kitchen table. "People keep asking about Clara's plans after high school," Mom was saying. "I just tell them she's taking a break to help at home. No point in making a big deal about it." A break. She was telling people I was taking a break. Aunt Darlene nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. Family girls serve while the boys shine. That's how it's always been." They'd erased my scholarship from existence. To the outside world, I was just the daughter who couldn't quite make it to college. Marcus got to be the academic success story while I became the cautionary tale. That night, I did something that probably saved my life. I accepted that scholarship in secret. I figured out the class schedules. I planned exactly how I'd make it work around their expectations. They thought they were protecting their perfect family image by hiding my success. Instead, they gave me the motivation to build something they'd never see coming. Have you ever had your family diminish your achievements to protect someone else's ego? Because that scholarship became my first taste of what I was actually worth when people weren't trying to keep me small. Comment below if someone ever tried to convince you to dream smaller. Because what they didn't know was that I was about to dream bigger than any of them could handle. Last December, Marcus threw what he called his network expansion party. In reality, it was just another excuse for him to show off while I cleaned up his mess. The house was packed with his college friends, a few of Dad's business contacts, and some people from Mom's charity circle. Marcus had been hyping this party for weeks like it was some kind of professional summit. This is where relationships are built, he kept telling Dad. Where real connections happen. By 10 p.m., those real connections had turned into drunk college kids breaking things and throwing up on our grandmother's antique rug. I spent the night running around with paper towels and trash bags while Marcus played host in his expensive suit. Every time someone needed something cleaned or refilled, guess who got the job? But the moment that changed everything happened around midnight. I was on my hands and knees in the bathroom, scrubbing vomit off the marble floor, when I heard voices in the hallway. Marcus was introducing himself to someone important, I could tell by his fake professional voice. "This is such an impressive home," a woman was saying. "Your parents have done well for themselves." "Thank you," Marcus replied. "Yeah, it's been great growing up here. Really shaped who I am today." Then I heard the words that shattered whatever loyalty I had left. "Do you have any siblings?" she asked. "No," Marcus said without missing a beat. "I'm an only child. Gets lonely sometimes, but it means I get all the attention and resources. Probably why I'm so focused on success. An only child." I sat there on that bathroom floor, wearing rubber gloves and reeking of disinfectant, listening to my brother erase me from existence to impress some stranger. Not "I have a sister who's shy" or "my sister doesn't like parties." Just nothing. I didn't exist. I finished cleaning that bathroom in complete silence. Then I walked to my room, closed the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was falling out of its ponytail. My shirt had bleach stains. My hands smelled like cleaning chemicals. At 21 years old, I looked like exactly what they'd turned me into, the help. But something clicked that night. Something cold and determined. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. Not homework. Not college applications. A business plan. See, while I'd been invisible to my family, I'd been watching everything. I knew how Dad's clients thought. I understood Mom's social strategies. I'd absorbed every business conversation, every networking tip, every success story they'd shared over dinner. They thought they were teaching me to be a servant. Instead, they'd given me a masterclass in how successful people operate. That night, I registered a domain name. Nova Strategies. I opened a business bank account with money I'd saved from the tiny allowance they gave me for helping around the house. By sunrise, I had my first website live and my first business cards ordered. Marcus had told that woman he was focused on success because he got all the resources. What he didn't know was that the sister he'd just erased was about to build something that would make his college networking parties look like amateur hour. 3 months later, I had my first client. 6 months later, I was profitable. A year later, I was making more money than Marcus would see in his first job out of college. All while living in the same house where they treated me like I didn't matter. Have you ever had someone deny your existence to make themselves look better? Because that bathroom floor moment became my declaration of independence. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine. I'd be invisible while I built an empire they never saw coming. Drop a comment if you've ever used someone's cruelty as fuel for your success. Because what happened next would prove that the only child they thought they had was about to get the shock of his life. The first night I decided to build my own future, I waited until everyone was asleep. 2 a.m. became my power hour, the only time this house was truly mine. I'd creep down to the kitchen with my laptop, make myself coffee, and transform our breakfast table into my secret headquarters. While my family dreamed about Marcus's bright future, I was building my own. My first client came through pure desperation and a stroke of luck. Mrs. Patterson owned a small bakery downtown that was struggling with social media. She'd posted a help wanted ad on the community board at the grocery store, $15 an hour for someone to make my Facebook look professional. I answered that ad using an email address they'd never trace back to me. When she asked for my experience, I didn't lie. I told her I was young but hungry, and I'd worked twice as hard as anyone else she could hire. That first week, I spent every midnight hour learning everything about bakery marketing. I studied her competitors, analyzed their social media strategies, and figured out what made people actually buy cupcakes online. By the end of the month, I'd increased her online engagement by 200%. Her weekend sales doubled. She was so happy she gave me a bonus and asked if I knew anyone else who could help small businesses like hers. That's when I realized I'd found my calling. But keeping it secret was like living a double life. During the day, I was still Clara the invisible daughter. I'd wake up early to make breakfast, clean the house, do laundry, and listen to Marcus brag about his college internship applications. Then at night, I became someone completely different. Someone who solved problems, created strategies, and helped businesses grow. Someone who mattered. The hardest part was hiding my excitement. When Mrs. Patterson's bakery got featured in the local newspaper for their innovative social media presence, I wanted to show everyone. Instead, I had to pretend I'd never seen the article while Mom read it aloud at breakfast. "Look at this," she said, holding up the paper. "This little bakery figured out how to use Instagram properly. Gerald, maybe you should have Marcus look into social media strategies for your firm." I nearly choked on my orange juice. Marcus, who couldn't even remember to post on his own Instagram account, was going to become the family's social media expert. But I kept my mouth shut and took mental notes. If Mom thought social media expertise was valuable, then I was building something she'd eventually have to respect. The real breakthrough came when Mrs. Patterson introduced me to her friend who owned a boutique. Then that friend referred me to someone with a restaurant. Within 3 months, I had 6 regular clients and was making more money than my allowance had ever provided. I opened my first real business bank account on a Tuesday afternoon, telling my parents I was at the library studying. Seeing that balance grow felt better than any birthday gift I'd ever received. Mrs. Alvarez, our elderly neighbor, started noticing my late-night kitchen sessions. One morning she caught me coming back from a client meeting. "Clara, honey," she said from her garden. "You've got that look." "What look?" I asked. She smiled knowingly. "The look of someone who's figured out their own worth. I've been watching you grow up, and I always knew you were sharper than all of them combined." For the first time in months, someone saw me for who I was becoming, not who my family thought I should be. Have you ever had to hide your success from the people who should be celebrating it? Because those midnight hours were about to turn into something none of them expected. By my 20th birthday, the one where they gave me a gift card to a cleaning supply store, I was ready to make everything official. I'd been running my consulting work under my own name for 8 months, but I knew I needed something bigger. Something that sounded professional when CEOs Googled it. Something that would make my family's dismissal look ridiculous. Nova Strategies LLC was born on a rainy Tuesday morning while everyone thought I was at community college orientation. I'd been lying about college for 6 months by then. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I told them I was taking business classes at the local campus. Really, I was meeting clients, attending networking events, and building relationships with business owners who saw my worth immediately. The lies were getting complicated, but they were necessary. Can you imagine trying to explain to your parents that their lazy daughter was running a profitable consulting business while they planned your brother's future corporate takeover? My first big break came through a referral from Mrs. Patterson's nephew. He owned 3 auto repair shops and was losing customers to competitors with better online presence. "I need someone who understands digital marketing," he told me during our coffee meeting. "Someone young who gets how people actually use social media." I showed up with a presentation I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. Market analysis, competitor research, content strategy, and projected ROI calculations. The kind of work Marcus was supposedly learning in his expensive business classes. "How old are you?" he asked when I finished. 20, I answered honestly. "And you put this together yourself?" "Every word." He hired me on the spot. 3-month contract, $1,500 a month, plus bonuses for hitting engagement targets. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I could fly. $1,500 a month was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was more than my parents gave Marcus for his monthly expenses. But the real victory was what happened after I implemented his new strategy. Within 6 weeks, his appointment bookings increased by 40%. His Google reviews went from 3.2 stars to 4.8. 2 of his competitors started copying the content calendar I'd created for him. He was so impressed he introduced me to his business network, other shop owners, restaurant managers, small business owners who needed exactly what I was offering. Word spread fast in that community. The young consultant who got real results. The girl who understood both business strategy and digital execution. The one who charged fair prices and delivered more than she promised. By the end of that year, I had 12 regular clients and a waiting list for new projects. I rented a small office space downtown, told my family it was a study group location for my community college classes. Really, it was my first real headquarters. A place where I could meet clients without worrying about Marcus walking in or mom demanding I help with dinner. The day I put Nova Strategies CEO Clara Mitchell on that office door was the day I knew there was no going back. My business checking account had more money in it than my parents' savings. My clients respected my opinions and paid for my expertise. I was building something real while living in a house where I was still expected to fold laundry and serve dinner. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. During the day, I was a successful business owner making strategic decisions for companies. At night, I was the invisible daughter who couldn't even get a place at the dinner table. But I wasn't ready to reveal my secret yet. I was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when the impact would be impossible to dismiss or minimize. Have you ever built something amazing while the people closest to you had no idea what you were capable of? Because that waiting list I mentioned? It was about to include someone who would change everything. Comment below if you've ever had to prove yourself to people who should have believed in you from the beginning. The email that changed my life came on a Wednesday morning while I was pretending to study for fake community college exams. Ms. Mitchell, I was referred to Nova Strategies by David Chen at Metropolitan Auto. We need a digital marketing consultant for a technology project. Are you available for a consultation? Victor Moretti, CEO, Moretti Tech Solutions. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Victor Moretti. I'd heard Dad mention that name dozens of times over dinner. He was the tech industry legend who'd built 3 companies from nothing and sold them for millions. The kind of person Dad desperately wanted to impress but never could get a meeting with. And he was asking for my help. I researched everything about his company before responding. Moretti Tech Solutions specialized in software development for mid-size businesses, but their online presence was stuck in 2010. Their website looked like a high school computer class project. Their social media was mostly automated posts that nobody engaged with. For a technology company, they had surprisingly outdated digital strategy. I spent 2 days crafting my response email. Professional but not stiff. Confident but not arrogant. I proposed a comprehensive digital overhaul that would position them as industry leaders, not just another tech service provider. His response came back within an hour. Impressive proposal. Can you meet Friday at 2 p.m.? I told my parents I had a study group that afternoon. Really, I put on my best professional outfit and drove to the most intimidating office building I'd ever entered. Victor Moretti was exactly what I expected: sharp suit, intense eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. But what I didn't expect was how genuinely he listened to my ideas. Your competitors are all saying the same thing, I explained during my presentation. Technical excellence, reliable service, competitive pricing. But you're not just selling software solutions. You're selling business transformation. That story isn't being told anywhere in your digital presence. He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. How old are you? 20. And you understand business transformation? I understand that businesses hire you when they're stuck and need to grow. I understand that growth is scary for most business owners. They don't want technical specifications, they want confidence that you can take them where they need to go without breaking what they've already built. The room went quiet. His marketing director, who'd been skeptical throughout my presentation, was taking notes. What kind of results can you guarantee? Moretti asked. I can't guarantee anything except that I'll work harder for your success than anyone you've ever hired. But based on my research and your market position, I believe we can triple your qualified lead generation within 6 months. Triple. I'd never promised anything that ambitious before, but something about his company's untapped potential made me confident. He hired me that day. 6-month contract, more money than all my other clients combined, and a performance bonus structure that could change my entire financial situation. But the real breakthrough came 3 months into our partnership. My strategy worked better than either of us expected. Their website traffic increased by 400%. Their conversion rate doubled. Most importantly, they were attracting bigger clients, the kind of enterprise contracts that Moretti had been chasing for years. "Clara," he said during one of our monthly review meetings, "you've fundamentally changed how we approach business development. My board is impressed." Hell, I'm impressed. That's when he dropped the opportunity that would eventually destroy my family's carefully constructed world. "We're expanding into new markets next year. I'm building an advisory board of consultants who understand growth strategy. Would you be interested in a permanent position? Equity participation, executive-level compensation, the works." I managed to stay professional during that meeting, but inside I was screaming with excitement. The girl my family treated like hired help was being offered an executive position by the CEO my father desperately wanted to impress. Have you ever had someone believe in your potential when your own family couldn't see it? Because what happened next would prove that sometimes strangers recognize your worth long before your own people do. 3 weeks after Victor offered me that executive position, Dad made an announcement that nearly made me laugh out loud. "Family meeting," he called from the dining room. "Important business discussion." We gathered around that same table where I'd spent years standing and serving. This time, I actually got to sit down. They needed my full attention for their grand plan. "I've been working on something big," Dad began, his chest puffed up with pride. "Victor Moretti, you know, the tech mogul, has agreed to have dinner with us next month." Mom's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "The Victor Moretti? Gerald, how did you manage that?" "Networking pays off," Dad said mysteriously. "Point is, this could be huge for our family's future. The kind of connection that opens doors." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Dad had no idea that Victor already knew our family existed, through me. "Marcus," Dad continued, "this is your moment to shine. Moretti needs to see that you're executive material. Capable, polished, ready to take on responsibility." Marcus straightened up, already performing his golden child routine. "What should I emphasize? My business coursework? My internship applications?" "Everything," Mom jumped in excitedly. "Your academic achievements, your leadership potential, your vision for the future." They spent the next hour planning Marcus's performance like he was auditioning for a Broadway show. What he'd wear. What he'd say. How he'd position himself as the family's rising star. "What about Clara?" Aunt Darlene asked, glancing at me like she'd just remembered I existed. The pause that followed said everything. "Clara will help with dinner service," Mom said finally. "Make sure everything runs smoothly so we can focus on the conversation." Of course. The invisible daughter would remain invisible while the golden child got his big break. "This dinner could change everything," Dad said solemnly. "Moretti has connections throughout the industry. If he's impressed with Marcus, doors will open that we never imagined possible. If only he knew." Over the next 2 weeks, they treated dinner preparation like a military operation. Mom hired a catering consultant to plan the perfect menu. Dad researched conversation topics that would showcase their sophistication. Marcus practiced his elevator pitch until he could deliver it in his sleep. Remember, Mom coached him during one of their practice sessions, confidence without arrogance. Ambitious but respectful. Show him you're ready for responsibility. Meanwhile, I was assigned my usual role, make everything perfect so they could take credit for the results. "Clara, you'll need to be extra sharp that night," Dad told me. "First impressions matter. If the service is flawless, it reflects well on the whole family." I nodded obediently while secretly planning the performance of my lifetime. They had no idea they were preparing for dinner with someone who already knew me as his most valuable consultant. Someone who'd offered me an executive position. Someone who respected my opinions more than he'd ever respect Marcus's rehearsed presentations. The irony was almost too perfect. They were coaching Marcus to impress the man who was already impressed by me. They were planning to showcase their golden child to someone who'd already chosen their invisible daughter as his business partner. But the best part? They were expecting me to serve dinner to the CEO who called me his strategic advisor. 3 days before the dinner, Mom pulled me aside for final instructions. "Clara, I need you to understand how important this night is," she said seriously. "Your father's worked years to get this opportunity. Marcus's future could depend on making the right impression. Everything needs to be perfect." "I understand, Mom," I replied. "Trust me, it'll be a night none of us will ever forget." She smiled, completely missing the double meaning in my words. Have you ever watched people prepare for something they had no idea you controlled? Because that dinner was going to be perfect, just not in the way they expected. Drop a comment if you've ever had a secret that would change everything if people knew. Because what my family was about to discover would flip their entire world upside down. The day of the dinner arrived like the morning of a revolution I'd been planning for months. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I had to make breakfast, but because I was too excited to sleep. Today was the day my invisible life collided with my real life. Today was the day my family would finally see who I actually was. But first, I had to play my part one last time. Clara, the flowers need to be arranged perfectly, Mom called from the dining room. And make sure you test all the wine glasses for spots. I spent the morning doing exactly what they expected, polishing silver, arranging centerpieces, setting the table like I was preparing for royalty. But every task felt different now. This wasn't me being the family servant. This was me setting the stage for my own reveal. Marcus paced the house in his expensive suit, practicing his talking points. I listened to him rehearse the same elevator pitch for the 100th time while I folded his napkins. Good evening, Mr. Moretti. I'm Marcus Mitchell, Gerald's son. I'm currently studying business management with a focus on strategic development and market expansion. Strategic development. Market expansion. He was using terms he'd learned in freshman-level textbooks to impress the man who'd been paying me to actually implement those concepts for real companies. Clara, Dad called from his office, come help me choose the right tie. First impressions matter. I stood in his doorway, watching him debate between navy blue and burgundy, knowing that Victor had seen me in jeans and sneakers during our working meetings and never cared about my appearance. Results mattered to him. Strategy mattered. Everything my family was obsessing over was meaningless to the person they were trying to impress. The navy one, I said. It projects confidence without trying too hard. He smiled at me with more warmth than I'd seen in years. Good eye. You know, Clara, even though you're not the focus tonight, your attention to detail makes all the difference. Not the focus. If only he knew. Around noon, Aunt Darlene arrived to help with final preparations and provide moral support. She immediately launched into her usual lecture about family roles and expectations. Marcus, this is your moment to show what the Mitchell family is capable of, she announced grandly. Clara, make sure you stay in the background. Let the men handle the business discussion. I nodded politely while mentally composing the email I'd send Victor after dinner, updating him on our Q4 strategy recommendations. By 3 p.m., the house was transformed into what Mom called elegant perfection. Fresh flowers in every room. Candles ready to be lit. The good china arranged on the dining table like we were hosting a state dinner. Everyone needs to change into their formal attire, Mom announced. Victor Moretti will be here in 3 hours. I went to my room and carefully selected my outfit. Not the black server's uniform Mom had suggested. Instead, I chose the same professional dress I'd worn to my last board meeting with Victor's executive team. The one he'd complimented, saying it projected exactly the right balance of authority and approachability. When I came downstairs, Mom looked confused. Clara, that's a bit formal for your role tonight. I want to represent the family well, I said simply. At 5:30, Marcus did his final practice run in front of the mirror. Dad reviewed his conversation notes one more time. Mom lit the candles and dimmed the lights to create ambience. I stood in the kitchen, looking out the window, waiting for Victor's car to pull into our driveway. My heart was pounding, but not from nerves. From anticipation. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 2 years. Every midnight work session. Every secret client meeting. Every lie I'd told to protect my growing business. It all led to this dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Victor, looking forward to tonight. Hope your family is ready for some surprises. If only he knew the surprise was going to be mutual. At exactly 6 p.m., headlights swept across our front window. Dad straightened his tie one last time. Mom smoothed her dress. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the performance of his lifetime. I walked toward the front door, knowing that when I opened it, everything would change forever. Have you ever stood at the moment when your secret life was about to collide with your real life? Because what happened next would either destroy my family's illusions or force them to finally see the truth they'd been ignoring for years. The doorbell rang. Showtime. I opened the front door, and there stood Victor Moretti in his perfectly tailored suit, holding a bottle of wine and wearing that confident smile I knew from dozens of business meetings. But the moment our eyes met, his expression shifted to complete surprise. Clara, he said, his voice carrying across the foyer loud enough for my entire family to hear. What are you doing here? The world stopped. Behind me, I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. Dad's footsteps froze halfway across the living room. Marcus's practiced greeting died in his throat. "Hello, Mr. Moretti," I said calmly, stepping back to let him in. "Welcome to my family's home." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Victor stepped inside, his confusion genuine as he looked from me to my parents and back again. "Your family's home? Clara, you never mentioned." I had no idea. Dad recovered first, his business instincts kicking in despite his shock. "Mr. Moretti, welcome. I'm Gerald Mitchell, Clara's father. We're so honored to have you here." Victor shook Dad's hand, but his eyes kept returning to me with a mixture of amazement and dawning realization. "This is my wife Serafina," Dad continued, his voice slightly strained, "and our son Marcus." "Nice to meet you all," Victor said politely, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Clara, you work with my company, but you live here," I finished. "With my family." Who had no idea about my business until right now. The bomb had been dropped. Now we all got to watch the explosion. Mom found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Clara, what is Mr. Moretti talking about? What business?" Victor looked around the room, clearly trying to piece together a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. "Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter runs one of the most successful consulting firms I've ever worked with. She's been my strategic advisor for almost a year." "Strategic advisor?" Marcus stammered, his rehearsed confidence cracking. But Clara doesn't, she's not." "She's brilliant," Victor said firmly, his tone carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. "Her marketing strategies helped us triple our client engagement. Her business insights have been invaluable to our expansion plans." Dad's face had gone completely white. "There must be some mistake. Clara's been taking community college classes. She helps around the house. She's never mentioned community college?" Victor looked genuinely confused. "Clara, you told me you graduated with honors. Your strategic thinking is graduate-level work." I felt a strange calm settling over me. The moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for 2 years had finally arrived. "I've been running Nova Strategies for almost 2 years," I said quietly. "I have 23 regular clients, a 6-month waiting list, and annual revenue that exceeds what most people make in their first decade of work." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. "Nova Strategies," Dad repeated slowly. "The consulting firm that..." His voice trailed off as memory kicked in. "The one that helped Davidson Industries with their digital transformation? That was me. The company that turned around Miller's restaurant chain? Also me." Mom sank into the nearest chair, her carefully planned dinner party dissolving into chaos she couldn't control. Marcus, meanwhile, looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. "But we thought you were. You thought I was nothing," I finished. "You thought I was the family failure who couldn't even get into a real college." Victor was watching this exchange with growing understanding, and I could see something shifting in his expression. Not just surprise anymore, but a kind of protective anger. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, his voice taking on the edge I'd heard him use with underperforming vendors. "Clara has been living in this house, running a successful business, and you had no idea?" "She never said anything," Mom managed weakly. "Because you never asked," I replied. "Because you never thought I was capable of anything worth asking about." The dinner they'd planned so carefully was turning into something none of them had prepared for. Marcus's elevator pitch suddenly seemed ridiculous. Dad's networking triumph was becoming his worst nightmare. Mom's perfect evening was cracking apart like an egg hitting concrete. And Victor Moretti, the man they desperately wanted to impress, was looking at them like they were the most foolish people he'd ever encountered. Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview shatter in real time? Because what came next would make this moment look like just the opening act. The silence stretched until Victor cleared his throat and stepped further into our living room, his businessman's composure intact despite the chaos he'd just witnessed. "Well," he said carefully, "this is certainly unexpected. Clara, I think we should probably discuss how this affects our working relationship." "Our working relationship is separate from my family dynamics," I replied professionally. "It always has been." Dad's face was cycling through emotions I'd never seen before, confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been pride fighting with wounded ego. "Mr. Moretti," he began, "I think there's been some miscommunication here. Clara has always been, well, she helps around the house, but she's never shown any interest in serious business." "Serious business?" Victor's eyebrows raised. Mr. Mitchell, your daughter increased our quarterly revenue by 40%. She developed the strategy that landed us our 3 biggest contracts this year. If that's not serious business, I don't know what is. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. But I'm the one studying business. I'm the one who's supposed to be good at this stuff. Victor turned to look at Marcus for the first time since entering the house. And how's that going for you? I have a 3.2 GPA in my business program. I've applied for internships at several major firms. I was hoping to discuss potential opportunities with you tonight. The pause that followed was devastating. I see, Victor said diplomatically. Clara, how would you describe your current academic standing? I graduated summa cum laude from State University last year with a degree in business strategy and marketing, I said quietly. I took night and weekend classes while building my client base. Mom's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. The crash seemed to snap everyone back to reality. You graduated, she whispered. When? How did we not know? Because you told everyone I was taking a break from school to help at home. Because you were embarrassed that I'd gotten a full scholarship when Marcus couldn't. Because it was easier to pretend I was the family disappointment than admit I might actually be successful. Aunt Darlene, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up with her usual venom. Surely there's some exaggeration here. Clara's always been good at domestic tasks. But running a real business? Clara's just Clara. Victor's expression went ice cold. Ma'am, I don't know what Clara is in this house, but in the business world, she's one of the most respected consultants I've ever worked with. Her clients include Fortune 500 companies, and her strategies have generated millions in revenue. Millions? Dad's voice cracked. Conservative estimate? Clara's work has been responsible for about 12 million in new business for our clients in the past 18 months. The number hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about me. Marcus slumped against the wall, his carefully planned presentation suddenly meaningless. I don't understand. How is this possible? She's the one who does laundry. I can do laundry and run a business, I said simply. Apparently, that's a skill set that's in high demand. Mom looked up from the broken glass at her feet, tears starting to form in her eyes. Clara, why didn't you tell us? Why keep it secret? Because you wouldn't have believed me. Because you would have found ways to minimize it or take credit for it. Because I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed without your approval before I could handle your reaction to my success. Dad sat down heavily in his leather chair, the chair he'd always considered his throne in this house. $12 million in new business, he repeated slowly. Actually, Victor interjected, checking his phone, I should mention something else. Clara, the board meeting we had yesterday? They approved your promotion. My heart stopped. Promotion? Senior Strategic Advisor, with equity participation and a seat on our executive team. You'll be overseeing our entire expansion into the Southwest market. Congratulations. The room went completely silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then Victor delivered the final blow that would haunt my family forever. Oh, and Clara? Given your new position and the authority it carries, I should probably mention, in our corporate structure, you'll technically be my boss on strategic initiatives. Dad's mouth fell open. Mom started crying openly. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Your boss? Aunt Darlene squeaked. Victor smiled at me with genuine warmth. The youngest senior advisor in company history, and definitely the most effective. I report to her on all strategic decisions moving forward. Have you ever watched someone's entire understanding of reality collapse in a single sentence? Because those 3 words, she's my boss, had just rewritten every assumption my family had ever made about who I was and what I was worth. The grandfather clock in our living room chimed 7 times, marking what felt like the end of one world and the beginning of another. Victor's words, she's my boss, echoed in the stunned silence like a verdict that couldn't be appealed. Dad stared at me as if he was seeing a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Boss, he repeated slowly, testing the word like it might explode in his mouth. In strategic matters, yes, Victor clarified, apparently oblivious to the earthquake he'd just triggered in our family dynamics. Clara will have final approval on all major business development decisions. It's an unprecedented level of responsibility for someone her age, but her track record speaks for itself. Mom had stopped crying and was now looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between awe and terror. How much, she began, then stopped, then tried again. How much does a position like that, what kind of salary? Mom, I said quietly, that's not really appropriate dinner conversation. But Victor, bless his heart, missed the social cue entirely. Oh, it's quite competitive. Base salary plus equity participation plus performance bonuses. Clara's total compensation package will be well into 6 figures, potentially 7 if we hit our expansion targets. Marcus made a sound like he was choking. 7 figures? Like $1 million? Potentially, yes. Clara's strategic vision is that valuable to our growth plans. Dad's hands were shaking as he reached for his scotch glass. $1 million, he whispered. I watched my family trying to process information that contradicted everything they'd believed about me for 21 years. The daughter they'd treated like hired help was potentially going to earn more in 1 year than Dad made in 5. There's more, Victor continued, apparently determined to complete the demolition of their worldview. Clara, I should probably tell you about the Forbes interview request. My stomach flipped. Forbes? They want to feature you in their 30 under 30-foot business leaders profile. Youngest woman to achieve senior advisor status in tech consulting. The headline they're proposing is From College Student to C-Suite, How One Young Woman Disrupted Traditional Business Consulting. Forbes. The magazine Dad read religiously, the one he'd always dreamed of being mentioned in. Of course, we'll need professional photos, Victor went on. And they'll want to interview your family about your background, your support system, what inspired your entrepreneurial drive. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Forbes wanted to interview the family that had spent years trying to convince me I wasn't worth interviewing. Aunt Darlene, who had been sitting in shocked silence since the boss revelation, finally found her voice. This is impossible. Clara's never shown any signs of, she's always been so. So what? I asked calmly. So ordinary, she finished weakly. Victor's expression hardened. Ma'am, there's nothing ordinary about increasing client retention by 85% or developing marketing strategies that consistently outperform industry benchmarks. Clara's work is exceptional by any standard. But she cooks dinner, Marcus said desperately, as if that fact could somehow restore the natural order of his universe. She does our laundry. She cleans the house. And I run $1 million consulting firm, I added. Turns out I'm good at multitasking. Victor looked around our living room, taking in the family photos where Marcus dominated every frame, the awards and achievements displayed on shelves that belonged entirely to my brother, the complete absence of any evidence that I existed as anything more than background support. Clara, he said slowly, looking at this house, I'm starting to understand why you were so driven to succeed on your own terms. The judgment in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. This was a man who commanded respect in boardrooms, who could make or break business relationships with a single conversation. And he was clearly questioning my family's judgment. Mr. Moretti, Dad said desperately, we've always supported Clara's interests. We just didn't realize they'd become so substantial. Substantial enough that 3 other companies have tried to poach her from us in the past 6 months, Victor replied. Substantial enough that she's being invited to speak at the National Business Strategy Conference next month. Substantial enough that her methods are being studied by MBA programs. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. I watched my family's faces cycle through disbelief, embarrassment, and something that might have been grief for the daughter they'd never bothered to know. The dinner, Mom said suddenly, looking around at the formal table setting, the expensive china, the carefully planned menu. We planned this whole dinner to impress you. To showcase Marcus. To make connections for our family's future. Victor followed her gaze, understanding dawning in his eyes. You were trying to impress me with your son while your daughter was already working as my strategic advisor. The absurdity of it hit everyone at the same time. They'd spent weeks preparing Marcus to impress the man who was already planning to promote me. It's like, Marcus said hollowly, like trying to sell ice to someone who already owns the ice factory. For the first time since Victor arrived, I almost smiled. Almost. The days following what I'd started calling the dinner disaster were like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Within 48 hours, everything changed. Dad, who hadn't voluntarily spoken to me about anything more complex than grocery lists in years, suddenly wanted to discuss business strategy over coffee every morning. He'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd served him breakfast for 2 decades, and try to engage me in conversations about market trends and corporate development. Clara, I've been thinking about your consulting work, he said on Thursday morning, his voice carrying a nervous energy I'd never heard before. Maybe we could collaborate on some projects. I have connections in traditional industries that might benefit from your expertise. Your expertise. 2 weeks ago, I was taking a break from school to help at home. Now I had expertise worth discussing. That's an interesting idea, Dad, I replied carefully. I'll have my assistant send you Nova Strategy's partnership requirements and fee structure. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. My assistant. Fee structure. The language of business between us instead of the language of family obligation. Mom's transformation was even more dramatic. She started texting me daily, not to ask me to pick up groceries or clean something, but to check in and see how my work was going. Clara, honey, I was talking to Janet at the country club about your consulting business, she wrote in one message. She's so impressed. She says her daughter's company might need marketing help. Should I give her your number? I stared at that text for 10 minutes before responding. 6 months ago, Mom was telling people I was too unfocused for college. Now she was trying to generate business referrals for me. But Marcus's reaction was the hardest to watch. My golden child brother, who'd never faced genuine competition in his life, was struggling to process being instantly demoted from family success story to the other kid. His carefully constructed identity as the Mitchell family's business prodigy had evaporated in a single dinner conversation. He'd started avoiding family meals, spending most of his time in his room or out with friends who didn't know about his sister's sudden transformation from invisible to invaluable. I don't understand how this happened, he told Mom during a conversation I overheard through the kitchen wall. She was always just there. In the background. Doing family stuff. I know, sweetheart, Mom replied, though her voice carried uncertainty now. We all missed it somehow. Missed it. Like my success was a weather pattern they'd failed to notice rather than a result they'd actively discouraged. The real test came on Saturday morning when Victor called during family breakfast. Clara, we need to move up our timeline on the Peterson Industries proposal, he said without preamble when I answered. Their CEO wants to meet Monday instead of next week. Can you have the strategic overview ready by Sunday night? Absolutely, I replied. I'll have the full presentation prepared with implementation timelines and budget projections. When I hung up, the kitchen was completely silent. Dad, Mom, and Marcus were all staring at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Peterson Industries? Dad asked quietly. The Peterson Industries? Victor's been trying to land them as a client for 2 years, I explained. We finally got their attention with the digital transformation case study I developed last month. And you're leading the presentation? I'm creating the strategic framework they'll base their decision on, yes. Dad set down his newspaper, the same newspaper where Peterson Industries had just been featured as one of the region's fastest-growing companies. Clara, he said carefully, do you realize what a contract with Peterson Industries could mean? For your career? For your future? I looked at my father, this man who'd spent decades trying to build the kind of business connections I was now creating effortlessly, and felt something shift between us. Dad, I said gently, this isn't about my future anymore. This is my present. That afternoon, Aunt Darlene called. Not to speak to Mom or check on Marcus, but to talk directly to me. Clara, dear, she said in a voice I'd never heard her use before, I may have been hasty in some of my comments about career paths for young women. Perhaps we could have lunch sometime and discuss your business insights? The woman who'd spent years reminding me that family girls serve while the boys shine was suddenly interested in my insights. But the most telling moment came Sunday evening. I was working on the Peterson presentation in my room when Mom knocked on my door. Clara? Could I bring you some coffee? You've been working so hard. My mother, who had trained me to serve everyone else in the family, was offering to serve me. That's okay, Mom, I said. I'm almost finished. She lingered in my doorway, looking around my room like she was seeing it for the first time. You know, we should probably talk about getting you a proper home office. If you're going to be working with such important clients. A home office. In the house where my bedroom had been converted into storage space for Marcus's extra clothes. Have you ever watched people scramble to rebuild a relationship they'd spent years destroying? Because the family that had treated me like hired help was suddenly desperate to become my support system. The problem was, I was no longer sure I needed their support for anything. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, I sit in my new downtown office, not the cramped space I once rented in secret, but a full suite with floor-to-ceiling windows and a polished conference table that seats 12. Nova Strategies now employs 15 people. My waiting list has stretched to 8 months. Just last week, Harvard Business School called, asking if I'd consider guest lecturing on non-traditional business development strategies. But the most profound changes happened at home. The family dynamic I endured for 21 years didn't simply shift, it inverted. Dad now seeks my opinion on his business decisions, genuinely valuing my strategic mind. Last month, he even hired Nova Strategies to consult on his firm's digital marketing approach. He pays our full corporate rate and brags about me to his golf buddies. Clara's insights helped us land our biggest client in 5 years, he tells anyone who will listen, rewriting decades of dismissal with startling ease. Mom has reinvented herself as my unofficial publicist, proudly showing neighbors the Forbes article that featured me. I always knew Clara was special, she says. We encouraged her entrepreneurial spirit from a young age. I don't correct her. What would be the point? Marcus, once the untouchable golden child, crumbled under the weight of losing his identity. Depression and failing grades hit him hard, but eventually, he found a new calling in social work. Clara, he told me during our first real adult conversation, I want to apologize. Not just for the dinner party, but for never seeing you as you. Turns out I'm better at helping people than competing with them. Maybe being the golden child was never really good for me either. Aunt Darlene, who once offered backhanded compliments, now sends me business articles and seeks investment advice. The transformation is almost surreal. Yet the most important change has nothing to do with them, it's how I see myself. I love my family, but I no longer need their approval. They can be part of my life, but they are no longer the center of it. Clara, Victor said during our quarterly review, the board wants to discuss making you a full partner. Partner. At 22, I am being offered equity ownership in a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. Yesterday, Mrs. Alvarez visited me. I told you that you were sharper than all of them combined, she said. You were always watching, learning, thinking ahead. They mistook quiet observation for passive acceptance. She was right. Every dinner where I served them, I was also studying them. They thought they were teaching me my place. Instead, they handed me a masterclass in business strategy. The final lesson isn't about revenge. It's about knowing your worth. Someone else's inability to see it doesn't make it smaller. My family once treated me like I was invisible. But I built my empire in plain sight. To anyone who's been overlooked. Your value exists whether they recognize it or not. Build anyway. Succeed anyway. The family that needed me small now celebrates my success. But by the time they were ready to see me, I no longer needed them to. And that is the most powerful position of all. If this story resonated, share a moment when someone underestimated your potential. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Subscribe if you want more stories about turning invisible into invincible.